For 2 decades, the London Shipping Law Centre has provided the highest standard of advanced education to the shipping industry. It's a very special forum, attracting a wide range of maritime education enthusiasts and networkers in congenial settings. Yet it would not have existed, let alone thrived, without the foresight, dedication and energy of one person, Dr. Aleka Shepherd. The founding chairman would now like to welcome you.
Good evening to everybody, and a very warm welcome to you all. I feel it's my 20th birthday. My lords, the right honourable members of the judiciary, minister, representatives of maritime organisations, foreign guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, well, if you heard what was said about me, which I doubt because it was a lot of noise, I like to make a very important point. The continued success of the Centre is entirely due to a team effort by our dedicated supporters, our council, the members of the judiciary who chair our events, members of our committees, our faculty, and all of those who work to administer the Centre. So I'm truly grateful to all of you, and I thank you most sincerely. You have gathered here tonight in overwhelming numbers, and it is very pleasing to see so many of you so happy and cheerful, looking forward to this event. This, of course, your gathering marks your commitment to our common objective. That is, to support shipping, of course. Shipping, as we all here know, is the most important industry. Ships transport 95% of the world trade. Related sectors exist because of shipping. You and I are lucky to have work because of shipping. And I could go on and on with many other examples. But people in the streets do not appreciate that shipping makes a huge contribution to the economies of most nations in the world. And the UK is one of those nations. So let's blow our own trumpet. So tonight here, in the UK's capital, London, the greatest maritime centre, if I may say so, we are celebrating not just the 20th anniversary of the London Shipping Law Centre, but the very reason of its existence. That is, of course, ladies and gentlemen, to promote quality shipping. And I repeat, quality shipping. And also to challenge unworkable laws or bad regulation, but of course to enhance our members' and supporters' skills for better dispute resolution. Over the past 20 years, through our seminars, debates, reviews, workshops, mock trials, special events, our centre has had an important and positive influence on the development of shipping law and regulation. And this occasion is an opportunity for all of us to cherish this and reflect on what the LSLC has achieved. The seeds were sown back in 1994. You can imagine the energy required to start something original and also the effort required to continue its growth. The concept and my vision when I started it was to create an organization which was rather, well, you know, a bit like a club for members from all sectors of the industry to meet and to exchange knowledge and ideas. Of course, this was very ambitious indeed in those times because people are very busy, they had busy schedules. But what I had not appreciated was the appeal that networking would have for so many. And then, of course, there was a particular attraction, the attraction of continuing professional development. And guess what? The center became a magnet for CPD. So when experts came along from the industry, on the tide, CPD points flowed. By the way, you are actually earning 5 hours of CPD tonight. Make a note of that. Our center connects not just lawyers, but also other professionals from all maritime sectors. All together, they create a vibrant forum, and over the past 2 decades, the collective expertise provided by our panels of over 400 volunteers has produced a bountiful harvest. Our dream has become a reality, in fact, as our president, Lord Mastill, who unfortunately cannot be here tonight, had anticipated. That dream has been greatly supported by our Vice President, Lord Clark, and by many other eminent members of our judiciary, many of who are here tonight, and thank you for coming. But quite honestly, the center would not have survived, let alone thrive, without the tremendous support lent to us by our legal and commercial members. And it is, ladies and gentlemen, our members and supporters together who provide the bedrock, making London an outstanding jurisdiction for dispute resolution, and, I may say so, a jurisdiction that provides the best judiciary in the world, and it is the very best maritime center. The LSLC underpins this world-renowned system of maritime business here in London, which offers such great value to its users and attracts a multitude of foreign business. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do we stand for?
The 4 pillars of the London Shipping Law Centre are leading, connecting, sharing, educating. That is, 20 years of leading maritime education, 20 years of connecting people, 20 years of sharing knowledge, 20 years of educating a wide spectrum of shipping professionals. The LSLC forefronts. For 20 years, the centre has been at the forefront in risk management education, in bringing industry sectors together, in promoting quality shipping.
Okay, so far so good, but what about the future? To maintain our momentum, we need, of course, the right people. And we certainly do have them. Who these might be? They are our young maritime professionals who will take the London Shipping Law Centre forward to the future. I'm really very impressed by young followers, by their enthusiasm, the quality of their initiatives, and by their achievements. They are honing their skills in leadership and are providing the very best, or the highest quality of whatever they do to serve our industry. They have, of course, challenging years ahead, but I do trust them. Their chairman, for the time being, is Menelos Kouzoupis. He will say hello later. Now, of course, all that we at the LSLC and our young maritime professionals have been able to do owes a considerable debt to our various sponsors.
Our sponsor of the London Shipping Law Centre office. Quadrant Chambers is proud to host the London Shipping Law Centre at Quadrant House. Thanks to our regular event sponsors. Our seminars could not take place without the consistent and generous support of our corporate members. Our anniversary and Cadwallader sponsors. Special thanks go to our principal sponsor, Holman Fenwick Willan. To our gold sponsor, Lloyd's Register. To our silver sponsor, the American Club. And to our bronze sponsors, Bimco, Britannia P&I Club, Cheese Rights, Clyde & Co, Essex Court Chambers, Reed Smith, 7 Kings Bench Walk, Shell International Trading and Shipping Company, Ship Assist, Stone Chambers, Savaleris Salvage Group, 20 Essex Street, the UK P&I Club.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to express my special and personal thanks to all our sponsors for their excellent support of this event. And of course, to all of you for being here to celebrate this landmark occasion. And I must say, I love you all for being here, and I'd like you to have a great time tonight. Before I leave you, I would like to invite our Vice President, Lord Clark, to say a few words of welcome to you. Lord Clark.
As ever, following Alika, I am completely redundant. She's already welcomed everybody. And I must say, there are an awful lot of people, you can't tell that sitting down there. But welcome. But before I give up, which is going to be very, very soon, I think I should actually thank Alika, because there's absolutely no doubt that this evening wouldn't be taking place without her, and that the whole organisation wouldn't take place without her. And she's an inspiration. She sometimes doesn't stop talking, but she is the most brilliant person. And she writes books the rest of the time. I'd also like to thank Gerard Matthews, who's rather an unsung hero, who is, without him, this whole organisation wouldn't exist. So I think a small round of applause, at least, not quite as big as Alika's. I had thought that I might introduce Julian Bray, the editor-in-chief of Tradewinds, who's to chair this evening's events, but I understand that's a role for Alika, so I shall say nothing more about it. The topic for debate is regulatory changes shipping between a rock and a hard place. I sometimes think that judges are sometimes between a rock and a hard place. This evening, I had hoped to sit next to Lord Justice Longmore, but he heard that he was going to sit between Sir Bernard Ricks and me and has decided not to come. Whether that's sitting between a rock and a hard place, only time will tell. The flyer says that we are to have an illustrious debate, followed by a superb three-course dinner. Only time will tell. Thank you all for coming.
Brilliant. Our Vice President is always so good, so it's worth having him to speak, in fact, to say the whole lot. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the highlight of the evening, tonight's debate, regulatory challenges, shipping between a rock and a hard place. Is it? Julian Bray, Editor-in-Chief of Tradewinds and previously of Lloyd's List, will chair and moderate the debate. He is very well known to you and needs no introduction. He is, in fact, one of the world's leading maritime journalists. Julian will introduce the debaters and moderate them, which may be a difficult task, considering the very strong personalities of both Clay and Christine. But nothing is too difficult for Julian. So without further ado, Julian, over to you, and thank you. Good luck.
As Lord Clark said, only time will tell. We shall see. Your Lordships, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, may I add my own welcome, of course, to this, the 13th Cadwallader debate and the 20th anniversary of the London Shipping Law Centre. And Aleka deserves every credit for that. I'd like to also thank Aleka personally for entrusting me with moderating tonight's event, a mere journalist. Think of me perhaps as the soft cushioning between the rock and the hard place here. It will be up for you to decide which one is the rock and which one is the hard place, but hopefully it will provide some stimulating debate. This is actually the third time in almost as many weeks that I've been asked to address a room full of attentive lawyers. And it just made me think that over the past couple of years here in London, a number of my illustrious fellow journalists have faced roomfuls of lawyers in rather darker circumstances, largely due to their own shameful behaviour. I must say that my habitual appearance before lawyers currently is of my own free will and in thoroughly convivial circumstances, and I'm delighted to be here. It's a great pleasure, of course, to have such a pair of highly erudite, knowledgeable speakers here tonight to conduct this debate. First, if I may introduce Clay Maitland, who will be proposing the motion. Clay is something, if I could say, something of a national treasure in the shipping industry. He was in fact born here in London, remarkably, but he's very much every inch the American these days. He trained as a lawyer and has worked in the shipping industry ever since graduation. Many of you will, I'm sure, know him very well. He's these days managing partner of International Registries Inc., which administers the Marshall Islands, one of the world's most successful, I still call them flags of convenience, but he would call them free registers, open registers. He previously, of course, helped develop the Liberian Register for many years and led that to great success. Nowadays, he is also involved with many shipping organizations, charities, and is the chair of NAMEPA, the North American Marine Environment Protection Association. He always brings a very clear-eyed, experienced vision of shipping regulation, and very much from a business perspective. Debating with Clay this evening, we're honoured to have Christine Berg, who's the head of the Maritime Safety Unit in the European Commission's DG Mobility and Transport. Of course, the Commission, at the start of this month, opened up under the new Jean-Claude Juncker-led Commission. I'm sure only time will tell exactly where that takes maritime safety in the new Commission, but I'm sure Christine may offer some hints as to where things are moving. She's very proud, in fact, to talk of one small element of her shipping heritage, even though she comes from Austria. She was born in the same city as Helmut Sohmann, the city of Linz, so there is some strong bond with shipping, she feels. She started a career in business too with the management consultants Price Waterhouse Coopers before joining the Commission in 1996. She's been involved in industrial regulation, has experience in the energy sector before moving into shipping and maritime safety in 2012. She started on the 1st of January 2012. On the 13th of January 2012, the Costa Concordia turned turtle in Italy. It must have been a baptism of fire, to say the least, and she's managed to navigate that, the aftermath of that in the Commission with great skill. So to the debate. Regulatory challenges, shipping between a rock and a hard place. With the motion, this House believes that parochial policies of regional regulators will wreck international shipping. Just before I ask Clay to propose the motion, I'd just like to outline proceedings. We'll initially have a two-way dialogue between the speakers on the platform with a proposition and an opposition each, and then a response. Then we'll open the debate up to you in the audience for questions and contributions as you see fit for 15 or 20 minutes. We'll then have a brief summing up from Christine and Clay, and then of course it's on for dinner. And there's a strict guillotine on that, so don't worry, we'll be there. Just a few very brief opening comments from me. Regulation in shipping has been a child of its times. Since the IMO was formed in the post-war period, shipping regulation has had an enviable internationalist and multilateralist approach. Industry had very much a seat alongside government. Developed nations were happy to devolve responsibility as shipping moved offshore. As long as shipping delivered excess capacity to lift world trade, only a modicum of basic standards were required. The system worked and was broadly acceptable to all. But frankly, as shipping further industrialized, tension with rising social standards increased. First with oil spills and then later passenger ship safety, bulk carrier safety. Now the debate has moved on to CO2, sulfur, emissions, ballast water, and labor conventions. Industry has found it harder to comply, while governments and regulators have been increasingly frustrated by industry inertia. Too often, what has been billed as a consensual approach has been given lip service in terms of open dialogue. Rather, it's been a dialogue of the deaf. Industry bemoans what it sees as burdensome regulations while refusing to see the political necessity of a lot of those regulations, while regulators sometimes miss crucial practical implications and complications. They sometimes also fail to police and enforce regulations which lead to creation of unfair markets. As a result, in this fractured modern political world, regionalism is arguably on the rise in shipping. So the question in front of us tonight is, will regionalist-born environmental regulations wreck the shipping industry? Or is it merely an expression of the realpolitik, which has always been present, frankly? So, to propose the motion, may I invite Clay to the podium.
Thank you, Aleka. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, all of the organizers, distinguished justices, friends from the maritime industry. I'm deeply humbled by the eminence of the audience that confronts me and my colleague, and if I may say so, adversary in our debate and our comments tonight. As Julian may have indicated, I'm sort of the Boris Johnson of the maritime legal community, in that, although I don't, unlike Boris, hold dual nationality, I could. I was born here. Dad was American. Dad was British. Mum was American. I only have one passport, so if there's any problems about taxation, come see me. I'll straighten them out. Heard a good joke the other day, and I'm not good at telling jokes, but it's one that I'm sure many people have heard. George Best, a famous footballer, known here, a famous party giver and party goer, checked into, I believe, the Dorchester Hotel, a hotel like that, with a girlfriend and a large sum of cash, and ordered a great deal of champagne. And when the waiter went up to his room, rang the doorbell, Best opened it up, and he saw all the money, all the champagne, the beautiful girl. And the waiter looked at George Best and said, "Where did it go wrong, George? Where did it all go wrong?" You all heard that. And to some extent, we can ask that question tonight about maritime regulation as we see it in the year 2014. This is the 35th anniversary of an incident called the Imoko Cadiz, very close to the 35th anniversary. The Imoko Cadiz, some people may remember it, went aground on the coast of France in 1979. The consequence of the Imoko Cadiz, among other things, was that an eminent British judge, Lord Donaldson, I think then the Master of the Rolls, he later became the Master of the Rolls, I think he was already Master of the Rolls, was asked to head a board of inquiry. The Donaldson Commission came up with some very concrete proposals. At the same time, the International Maritime Organization undertook to draft a comprehensive convention on maritime pollution. This is where the European Commission comes in. The Marpol Convention, as it became, was the first real signature convention, if you will, that embodied what is known as port state control. I would argue that port state control has been a great success. Flag state control, and I have worked for a flag state since 1976, has perhaps a spottier record, perhaps through no fault of the flag states. And I hope that today, or this evening, will not only be a debate, but will also be a discussion of where we go from here on that. Do we continue burdening the seafarers with the burden of filling out forms, responding to checklists, and the pressures of doing all the things that we think bring us to safer ships, cleaner seas? Because it was Lord Justice Donaldson who famously wrote in that report that the goal, our goal, the goal of the industry, the goal of mankind, should be safer ships, cleaner seas. We have got safer ships and cleaner seas, and we're working constantly to improve that record. But the question is, where do we go from here? Thank you.
Could I invite Christine to respond?
Thank you and good evening. It's my great pleasure to be over here with so many distinguished guests in an organization that wants to network, spread good practices, educate young people, and promote the quality of shipping. And I think this is the commonality we have with the European Union. And the messages I can bring to you also, the face may have become younger than the gentleman you have seen from Brussels before, is still the same. We want to see around the world quality shipping. For painful experiences we have learned lessons from in the past. And Clay mentioned port state control for sure has been a success. But it's not about control and control and control maniacs. We want shipping to have a level playing field. We want the business to drive innovation. We would like to have more visibility for the economic impact shipping makes on all our lives. And I think there you have an advantage being here in maritime London, where you have a center of excellence, and where perhaps we need more debate when we come back to Brussels, where a regional regulator is sometimes perceived, and has been perceived also by this House, as parochial. But I think it depends very much on the perspective. And one thing for sure we do, we talk to the industry, we listen to the industry, but we are not talking and listening only to the industry. As regulators, we also have to defend European taxpayers' money and have to take care of the protection of our coastlines, of the safety of citizens, and ultimately, we are also committed to do what it needs to be done in order to make a positive contribution to climate, which as such, I think, shouldn't be seen as the opposite end of a spectrum by business, because any responsible owner these days caters for safety, caters for security, sustainability, and ultimately, whatever you can do in order to bring down cost, bring down fuel cost, will also be good for the climate. So overall, my message for Europe would be, we are committed to international rules. We have done a lot over the past 20 years in order to enforce them, and we have built the tightest enforcement regime in the world, which makes it a real leveling playing field, in particular for those of the industry who are the front runners, who make investments, who upgrade their fleet, and who don't want to be bypassed by those who want to take shortcuts on safety or any other regulation.
Christine, thank you very much indeed. Clay, could I ask you to respond to some of that? Because the very fact that we are sitting here tonight debating a motion suggesting that there are regional regulators, that these are parochial policies and these will wreck international shipping, implies that something is not working.
Yes, I think that that's true. I would argue that regionalism and the weaknesses of regionalism began to be apparent in the United States some decades ago. I referred to the IMOCO Cadiz. The IMOCO Cadiz was responded to internationally and very successfully by the IMO, by the world community. Subsequent incidents, for example, the Exxon Valdez sinking in oil spill, it really wasn't sinking, resulted in a welter of state legislation. And here I realize I'm oversimplifying. There was quite a bit of that in the past. The US is a federal system. What the EU has done, in my opinion, over recent decades, since the European Union really began to formulate legislation, is to some extent to mimic the United States, in that it is a federal union in some say. So some would deny this. There are a lot of people here who would, I'm sure. But there's a great deal of localism in what the EU does. This has tended to run counter to the collective decision-making embodied in the United Nations as a whole. It certainly has run counter to the collective decision-making that we see at the IMO. Now, I know that collective negotiation has its shortcomings. One of them is delay. One of them is the need for to build consensus. But what we now see is the EU at loggerheads with the IMO and sometimes with its own member governments on a number of matters involving, for example, the governance of classification societies, the administration of the actual conventions by flag states, and who is going to supervise and audit those flag states. And this has the potential, I think, for real trouble. I hope I've answered your question.
This is a debate, so you were there to make the argument. Christine, how do you defend the position defend against the accusation that the European Commission hasn't been as consensual as those in the industry would suggest it would have been more constructive to have been?
Well, I think we have in the past shown a strong commitment to have a level playing field by doing international rules. What we have done to a certain extent is we are trying to be at the forefront. That may not be to the liking of everybody, but we think complacency is not the right approach for the development of an industry. We think that continuous improvement should be the right way forward. I would entirely agree that when you look back to the last 20, 30 years, very often policy, be it in the United States or in Europe, has shown a knee-jerk reaction to accidents. But I think this is part of the problem of this industry, that the industry as such is a very invisible industry to the average citizen. The average citizen takes it for granted that 95% of world trade are landed into our ports, or exports are leaving our ports. And whatever then is done by the industry is far away from the citizens' visibility, and only the negative impact makes it from time to the headlines. Nevertheless, I think we have learned from that, and what we try over the past 10 years is, other than having a knee-jerk reaction to accidents, is try to be on a continuous safety journey together with the industry. And I think it's not only safety, it is definitely also, over the past 10 years, it has been the environmental component, which, as said, should not be seen as only negative for business, but should also be seen as, in terms of efficiency, as providing some benefits for everybody. When we sort of used certain leeways to deviate from international rules, then I think in the past we have done so because the IMO rules have catered for them. We have done so when it comes to the safety of ferries, where we have set up more stringent rules for our regional ferries. We have used extensively the possibilities for ECAs when it comes to sulfur emissions. We have, I think, together with the IMO, accelerated the phasing in of double-hull tankers. And we are putting a focus on enforcement together with an agency we have created, for which the European taxpayer pays something like 55 million euros a year. This agency is helping member states and also the industry in order to put into operation existing rules. And it is a strong enforcement arm, which is taking its effect, in a sense that we have less accidents in European waters. I'm putting square brackets around the one I had my baptism with when I started my current job, in a sense that, well, you know, there can always be, you can have the best rules. Such human element type of things may happen, and they can happen in the future, but I think we have proven this time that we took a commensurate approach. We reviewed what is there. The IMO is still reviewing things which are there.
But we have not jumped into an exercise for the sake of the citizen or politicians just to tighten up rules for the fun of tightening up rules. That is not our way of looking at things.
There's a clear challenge there.
Can I respond to that?
You can. I was about to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Your position is very much from this motion, very much one of the past. It was based 15 or 20 years ago. Christine Berg is talking about a modern world where the approach to regulation is more sophisticated and more integrated.
Well, I think that I was talking about that when I said that we had to take the next stage beyond port state control. And that I thought that port state control, while very valuable and certainly something that must be maintained, should not continue to constantly grow with further accretions as new conventions, new laws, new proposals emanate from Brussels or from the IMO or from national capitals that put more and more burdens on the chief mate and the masters of ships. I think that's one of the big problems we face is the toll that this takes on the crew of ships. Very simple, very straightforward, but a major burden and something that we often lose sight of. The second thing is that we also lose sight of is what Christine herself has alluded to, which is the remarkable record of the shipping industry, which includes all of us, including the Commission, including the IMO, including the judges, the lawyers, the journalists, in safer ships, cleaner seas. The shipping world is a very different world today than it was 25, 35 years ago, when tanker explosions were frequent, when collisions were more frequent, when oil spills were more frequent, when personal injury claims were much higher than they are today. And I think that the industry does not get credit for this achievement, which has been remarkable. When you compare it with other transportation sectors, with the exception of aviation, we're seeing in North America now frequent accidents involving the transport of oil by rail, a problem that has not yet fully been addressed. We see problems, yes, in the shipping industry that I would like to see addressed more frequently. Michael Gray has alluded repeatedly to the lifeboat release mechanism problem, which is causing a number of deaths almost every month. That's something that I would like to see the Commission and the IMO really address, is the loss of life caused by defective lifeboat release mechanisms, a small, parochial, but significant straw in the wind. I think the most important thing to remember about when I said we needed to go beyond port state control, and I agree with Christine, we must not be complacent, is the fact that many of our problems today have not really gone away. The underlying problem still is that a ship is built, a ship is chartered, a ship is crewed, and a ship carries cargo, and I should say a ship is equipped, in accordance with the lowest cost. In other words, the lowest bidder. It was an old joke during the Second World War. The pilot takes a plane up, and as he gets up, he looks at his co-pilot and says, just remember one thing, this crate that we're flying was built and designed by the lowest bidder. And that is true to some extent, a considerable extent, with ships today. I was at a dinner in New York the other day, and it was a dinner given, an annual dinner of a classification society. I won't say which one is represented here today. And I sat next to a distinguished ship owner. And he looked at me and he said, Clay, you have a wonderful flag state here in the Marshall Islands. I love the Marshall Islands. All my ships are registered in the Marshall Islands. But you know something? You're too damn expensive. And I thought to myself, this chap just doesn't get it. He's talking to a man on his right who was a prominent banker about how much money he was going to borrow to build his next ship. And he didn't seem to worry about thinking in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But he's worried about the cost of a ship registration and is watching that penny. That's the chap you have to watch, because he's also thinking about paying as little as possible for a lifeboat release mechanism. And that is very much the case with shipping today. And I would argue, this was the theme that I tried to strike at the beginning, that that's where port state control, you know what they said about Guinness. Guinness is the beer that goes where others can't reach. Well, that's where port state control doesn't reach. There are areas where we have to find a way of regulating the safety, protection of the environment, and protection of the seafarer, Julian, that are not a check-the-box exercise with port state control inspection. Port state control is fine, the European Commission is fine, the IMO is fine, but we're going to have to go to take the next step, and I would argue that that will require greater policing of the flag state.
Christian Berg, if I put that to you, this is less an issue of the regulations per se, and it's an issue of enforcement and policing of those regulations, not just in regions, not just in North America or Europe, but worldwide. And frankly, without a greater consensus as to the intensity and rigor of that enforcement and policing, the system itself crumbles.
I think we would all agree that the industry should move from a checklist ticking activity, be it when you build the ship or when you operate the ship and when you come to port state control, to a sort of risk-based activity, so that you are getting away from the checklists and you are re-responsibilizing all the actors in the industry. As Clay has mentioned, the question, what has gone wrong, that the seafarer is spending more time in filling out paper than taking care of the ship, and do we continue to burden the seafarer? I think from the European perspective, our answer to that should clearly be no. We are putting high hopes in technology, in making a world a reality in which certain things have to be reported only once, and only when certain details change they have to be reported again, but not each and every time a ship calls into a port. We think that there is a major potential in freezing up time so that the seafaring profession can focus on what they are there for, the safe operation of the ship. We think there is a potential in reducing turnaround time in ports, which is good messages for the owners because this means money. The less time you spend in the port. We think that IT really has the potential of being exploited in a positive way and bringing it to a new dimension. But nevertheless, it will not do away with also what Clay mentioned. There is some hardware issues, if I may call them like this, be it the davits and the lifeboat release mechanisms, which are things which are plaguing the industry and for which only effective enforcement will actually help in order to make sure that every flag state takes care of their responsibility and that these things are properly maintained. Speaking from experience, we had campaigns in Europe where certain products had to be taken off the market because their products were flawed. We are doing that with a certain rigor. But I think in general, the next step for us is really to see how can we positively, as I said, use modern technologies to do a risk-based management. And I heard and noted down at the beginning when the society was presented that risk management is also an important topic which is frequently discussed at your events. And I think we should not only think about managing financial risks, but managing safety risks, environmental risks, and finding new approaches to do this other than the old checklist approach.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to open this discussion up to the floor. We have a couple of microphones, I believe, out there in circulation. I believe Martin is there. So if I could ask anybody to put up their hand and maybe make a contribution, if you could possibly say who you are at the starters, and then make it brief and pithy, it would be appreciated. So, in the centre of the room.
Hello.
Even my eyes are staying.
Yeah. Hello. Good evening. I'm Ravi Malhotra. My comments here as a ship owner that these IMO, European Union, or the port state control decisions are good, but in the process they made the shipping industry sick. And this is what I'd like to explain. Why it is sick? Because these regulations, when they are framed, do not take into account how a ship owner will pay for them. All the three organizations which I mentioned have nothing to do to see how ship owners will finance it. The reason is these organizations do not control the commercial shipping, which is unfortunately has been put under UNCTAD, which none of here people know about it. So therefore, the issue is these regulations are good, but slowly ship owners is developing a habit to avoid the minimum instead of becoming a very honorable and say, no, I will do more than what is being proposed. Thank you.
And somebody in the centre. Thank you.
Jean Richards, Quantum Shipping. I have to say I'm a seconder of the motion, since I do believe that shipping is in great difficulty. Parochial regulation leads to local political pressure. Local political pressure leads to the blame culture. And the blame culture is putting our seafarers in jail. I haven't heard anything tonight about risk, which is the perils of the sea. We have a very dangerous industry. We are doing our best. I am very much in support of Ravi Malhotra because he's right. There isn't enough freight per ton of cargo moved to pay for the maintenance of ships at the moment. Every regulation that is put in place means that the ship owner has less money for maintenance. But most ship owners have very large mortgages, and the banks take a retention account, and the banks take their interest and the contribution to capital, leaving the owner with no money. And I'm hearing nothing about subsidies, nothing about grants, nothing about the ways in which this international industry can actually pay for all this regulation. We would love safer ships. We would love safer seas. It's getting safer. But we really have to be a little bit realistic as to who actually is going to pay for this. And please stop putting, the word I heard more times tonight than anything else was the word enforcement. Enforcement equals putting the seafarers in jail or blaming somebody. We should try and do something alternative to that, because if we don't, then we will wreck international shipping. Thank you.
Good.
I can nothing but disagree with this statement, of course. I think it cannot be argued that in times of less bait or in economically difficult times, the way out is to have less regulation or to not enforce the rules which are there. That cannot be the answer. And that cannot be the answer in any other sectors as well. Sometimes there is market consolidation going on. And the normal thing about market consolidation is that some actors will leave the market. Now, that doesn't mean that as a regulator we are totally ignorant about economically difficult times and that we are only interested in putting more regulations on top of the industry. There is, and especially I think from Europe, there is lots of incentives for early movers to test issues, to pilot things, to get grants for research demonstrations in terms of flexibilities, in terms of taxation. But I think we should not confound the issues and think that it is that because of these regulations that the industry has economic hardship to face.
Now, any other contributions? Please, central room.
Hello, I'm Laura Buckland from Thomas Miller. I don't think there's any doubt that we have cleaner ships and safer seas as a result of regulation. And the ISM code was a fantastic checklist introduction. But what I think I would like to ask Dr. Berg is, how do you see the imposition of regulation about sulphur emissions on fuel, and how is that going to affect the fact that nobody has the wherewithal to deal with it?
Well, I think first of all, the sulphur rules which become effective as of 1st of January 2015, I think this is the big issue in Europe, are modeled upon the international rules. Let's not forget that they have been decided in 2008. We are 2014. Many parts of industries have been very complacent because there are rules to deal with them, be it technology, scrubbers, be it alternative fuels, be it the lighter sulfur content fuels, which, by the way, thanks to the fact that we are now at a 5 years low in terms of fuel prices, is also less dramatic than in the meantime we have heard from the industry. I think that all together have brought us now to a situation where some of the industry indeed has invested. Some of the industry is going for alternative fuels, LNG. Some of the industries have invested in scrubbers, which puts us in a position that we should not be punishing the early movers. We should not be doing that. I think any industry wants predictability, stable rules, a level playing field, allowing them to adjust and to make use or not of competitive advantages. And the rules have been created, they are there for a long term. Some have moved. And now we will see how things will be implemented. But again, normally when these rules are decided, and here is, I think, where the input from the industry has to come at an early phase, at least what we do in Brussels, we very carefully assess the impact of future rules. We consult largely with industry. And it is a common journey in a sense that normally when we propose something, already what we propose is a compromise in itself. And then there is lengthy periods of negotiation, and in the IMO I think there is even longer negotiation, and then the industry has time to adjust. And I'm afraid as a regulator, we are put in a difficult situation that we hear from one part of the industry, postpone your rules because we cannot cope with them. And from the other part of the industry, we hear, for God's sake, we have already made the industry, we have already made the investment, so now please let us get the benefits from the investment which we made. So I think in the end we are only getting around this by, in the beginning, and at best at the IMO, looking very carefully at what are we going to decide, assessing things, having sufficient lead times to prepare, but once the moment has come to implement, to enforce, then to do this, and to do this seriously.
As an observation, the very interesting development of this issue has been the emergence of the, I think it's called the Trident Alliance, which is now an alliance of something like 27 quite major ship owners, originally based in around Scandinavian ship owners, but now including a number of New York-listed ship owners who are urging robust enforcement of these new sulphur rules, not having a chance to backslide. Clay, as the industry representative here, how do you rebut the accusation that the industry has been complacent and it's full of inertia and it hasn't faced up to this changing world?
I don't think the industry has been complacent. I think that it's a very serious, and the industry has been adjusting for 6 years. There will always be areas of the industry that adopt an ostrich-like approach. Right? And I defer to no one in my criticism of the shipping industry. I think our biggest problem, however, is not with ship owners. When we talk about the industry generically, I think we make a mistake. I think that a great deal of what is slowing progress and adjustment to regulatory change, and I hope Jean doesn't condemn me for using the term regulation. Regulation is part of the world in which we live. What I think we need to accept is the fact that regulation can be sufficiently gradual and can be sufficiently measured so that it does not create dislocations and disruptions. That is not to say that it will not create change. We're seeing a great change taking place right now that many people in this room may not recognize. That is the switch to liquid natural gas as a fuel. More and more ships are being built quietly, but they are being built and they're being designed to be powered by LNG. It's cleaner, in many parts of the world, it's cheaper. It's not yet widely available, but it will change. It'll be the biggest change since the actual invention of the turbine. And it's happening now as we speak. That is being driven very largely by regulation, including by the European Commission, including by the IMO, including by the international regulation negotiations on climate change. And that's very, very important, and we are adjusting to that. What I think is happening, unfortunately, and here I am something of an outlier, but I believe that our industry does not have the representative voices and leadership among us that it once did. And I've said this before. You mentioned, Christine, that you come from the hometown of Dr. Helmut Sohmann. Dr. Sohmann, about 25 years ago, came to a conference that a number of us attended in Connecticut, in the United States of America. And he announced, at that time he was head of the Hong Kong Shipowners Association, that he was through going to international conventions and conferences on shipping, because he said there were too many people talking and there was too little leadership. And I know exactly what he meant. The fact of the matter is that we tend, as an industry, to go around in circles. We tend to mount the same eternal verities. We love to traffic in truisms. But nobody ever asks the question, what is the next big thing that we need to prepare for? So we didn't prepare adequately for ballast water management systems. Any more than we really prepared for oily water separators and the enforcement of MARPOL Annex 1. We didn't. Why didn't we do that? Failure of leadership. And I could go on, and I won't.
One last contribution from the floor over here, please, sir.
Yes, thank you.
just mentioned, both the panel. The only issue we do have here, which hasn't been mentioned, is over-regulation. I think you actually hit the nail on the head, Clay, because basically what we're having here was the lack of leadership. We have a situation where the European Union coming out with regulations, obviously instigated by politicians mostly, which cannot be complied with. You mentioned one in particular earlier, Christine, about the sulfur regulation, which is coming out on the 1st of January. I don't know whether you're aware of the fact that to comply with the sulfur regulations, we are going to actually cause a worse greenhouse effect worldwide by virtue of the fact that by reducing sulfur, you're going to actually have to create more pollutant, which is going to be more devastating worldwide. They've got the whole sum wrong. Going back to what Jean Richards mentioned earlier about criminalisation, I think it's a big issue because in shipping, first of all, shipping is a dangerous business anyway. What may happen in shipping will happen. We cannot actually divorce ourselves from the fact that it is a risk business. We are involved in our business for the last half a century in emergency response, and we see accidents every day of the year. So to sum up, we're not against regulation. 50 years ago, the shipping was under-regulated, but now you have a de facto situation of having over-regulation, and you're coming out with laws and things and issues which just cannot be complied with, whether it be the sulfur, whether it be the water ballast system in the States. It's getting it all wrong. Thank you.
Just finally, before we do break for dinner, and I ask the debaters to offer a very brief closing thoughts. Is there any final comment from the floor? One more from the floor. There's one over on this side. Thank you.
Steve Cameron from RTI Forensics. I applaud regulation. Standards, but because I applaud regulations and we applaud standards, but because of the pressures that ship owners are under, a lot of seafarers are being assessed by their ability to pass audits rather than to make decisions and make their own judgments. And if you don't think that's true, then why is it that every ship that's had an accident has actually got an ISM certificate, based approach rather than a regulatory approach, which I think is a good idea, and I'd like the panellists to expand on that in terms of their support or otherwise.
Clay, could you perhaps, as you sum up, incorporate that into your closing comments?
Summary, yes, I agree.
It's sometime since lunch, ladies and gentlemen. Christine, please.
If you want me to be equally short, the big buzzword we currently have in Brussels is actually refitting regulation, because indeed one of the big commitments of President Juncker is to have less regulation and to start fighting over-regulation. So I think overall, not only in Brussels, but generally, we should have a fresh look at the rules that have been created and see how can we create the same effect with lighter rules, so that people can focus on what they know best, doing the business, the safe operation of the ship when it comes to the crew, and doing less ticking of boxes and undergoing audits. But that means in the end that everybody has to be equipped in order to face the responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And on that note, may I just thank our two speakers this evening. If you'd like to give them a round of applause.
And
just like to just wrap up with a very final personal comment on this issue of shipping regulation. In fact, I grew up in Dorset, in the beautiful south, on the south coast of England, in a town just close to the coast. It was pristine, it was green, the air was clean, or so we thought. The river was clean, or so we thought. It probably wasn't. The sea seemed clean, or so we thought, but of course it wasn't. This was on Lyme Bay in the late 60s, early 70s. And Lyme Bay, I remember seeing the tankers out on the horizon. And every time we went to swim in the sea in this beautiful, pristine environment, these blue remembered hills, we used to come back smeared in oil. Occasionally we used to find large lumps of oil that had been cleaned from the tanks on the beach. This was a fact of life. As I say, I'm sure the rivers were as dirty then as the sea. If you go to West Dorset now, the beach of Bridport, you will find somewhere that does have its fair share of flotsam and jetsam lying around. But essentially it's clear of things like oil from tanks being washed. Of course, those tanks are being washed in a perfectly legal fashion in those days. But society here in Europe, worldwide, found that unacceptable. We have moved a huge distance as a society, as an industry. The shipping industry has moved a huge way in so many ways. That's just a vivid example from my own childhood. But the whole level of regulation, sophistication, and the specificity of those regulations is very tight. But let's remember, the distance we've got today has been from an environment with intense localism. Who remembers OPA 90? That was going to end the tanker business, ladies and gentlemen, if you listen to the tanker business. Who remembers the Erica package? That was going to end European shipping. European shipping is, apart from the financial problems of the German owners, that's another problem. That's for next year. Is flourishing. Ladies and gentlemen, localism is a very real issue for shipping because of its global nature. But the industry, those of you here from the industry, have made a huge contribution. The regulators, I personally believe, have made a huge contribution. This is something that we as a society should take pride in and embrace the future demands that our fellow citizens are going to be demanding of us. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention a couple of words. I want to say thank you to Aleka on behalf of all the governing body and trustees of the London Shipping Law Centre. Hello. For her childish enthusiasm, for her guts, her endless energy, and just on a finishing note, since Joseph Hughes did keep on coming out quoting the Americans, I'll quote something which was mentioned by an American philosopher by the name of Edwin Land, and he mentioned the following: never undertake a project in life unless it is manifestly important and virtually impossible. This is what Aleka has done. Thank you.
To have so many warm supporters. And don't forget, actually, I was a bloody foreigner. But I'm very British now. And I'm still Greek in a bit, really. I'm very Greek too. So I'm very confused. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming.